a new digital ad campaign to educate voters in battleground states about the Trump-Vance tickets Project 2025 plans to defund public schools and disinvest in America's children. These ads will be reaching voters in states like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and will reach voters who are searching for terms related to back to school as part of our efforts to make sure that voters know just how Donald Trump and JD Vance would put public education on the chopping block as part of their Project 2025 plans. Today, we are joined by State President Randi Weingarten, Congresswoman Jahana Hayes, former public school teacher and Iowa Democratic Party Chair Rita Hart. We're ready to talk about Donald Trump and JD Vance's dangerous Project 2025 agenda that would eliminate the Department of Education, defund public schools, reverse the Biden-Harris administration's student loan debt forgiveness efforts, and even reject free school lunch meals for students who are in need. So to begin with, I will turn things over to President Weingarten to talk a little bit about how Donald Trump and JD Vance's Project 2025 blueprint would be disastrous for public education, for our students, and for our teachers.
Thank you, Alex, very much. And I appreciate being able to talk about Project 2025 because of its draconian, heinous nature on school children in America. Donald Trump and JD Vance should be ashamed of themselves because what they are doing with Project 2025 as it pertains to education, forget about what they say in Project 2025. And yes, I know that Trump has said, oh no, he disclaims it, but he doesn't disclaim it when it comes to education. He believes in it. And what is it that he believes in? He believes in basically taking the ladder of opportunity away from our children. That's what he believes in. And when I say the ladder of opportunity, think about what it means when he says, get rid of the Department of Education. Okay, he doesn't like bureaucracy? Fine. He's saying get rid of what the Department of Education does. And what is that? It's helping our young kids, our youngest kids, get preschool through Head Start. It's helping our kids in K through 12, our kids who are neurodivergent, our kids who have disabilities, our kids who are poor, our kids who are in rural areas, our kids who need to have books and supplies and food and meals in order to actually have the engagement and the opportunity they need. He's basically saying, get rid of all of that. So kids who are disabled, get rid of all the funding that we do for them. Kids who are poor, get rid of all the funding we do for them. Kids who need breakfast. I'm sputtering because I'm so angry. Breakfast and lunch, get rid of all of that. Kids who are in preschool, get rid of all of that. That is what he's saying. And kids who basically have opportunity to go to college because we are trying to deal with unsustainable student debt, get rid of that too. So he essentially is saying that the thing that we do in America to help young people have opportunity to level the playing field, get rid of all of that. That is what Project 2025 does in terms of education. And let me say one more thing. The rest of what he's saying, the rest of what Project 2025 does is say that the only people who should have opportunity are people who are rich. Give the rest of what we do in terms of federal funds to the rich through vouchers. So tax cuts for the rich, get rid of anything from the poor, including in all the red states, and get rid of the work so that individual parents, if they see discrimination, can actually call it out, whether it's anti-Semitism or anti-Arab hate or any other kind of hate. That's why I say what Project 2025 does is take that ladder of opportunity, the thing that we say in America we want to do for all kids to level the playing field. What he's saying is just get rid of all of it. That's why we're so angry about what he's trying to do to young kids in America, to teachers in America. And speaking of teachers in America, one of the finest teachers in America is actually a congresswoman now from Connecticut, and that is Jahana Hayes, Teacher of the Year, Congresswoman from Connecticut, and I pass it over to you, Congresswoman Hayes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for even hosting this conversation. This is something that is deeply personal for me because, to Randy's point, the level of specificity in Project 2025 geared at education is remarkable. And it's not education for everyone. It is for our most vulnerable children in our most vulnerable communities. As Randy said, I was a teacher 15 years in a Title I school district. This plan, this Trump-Vance Project 2025 plan, would eliminate 2/3 of the funding from Title I school districts. What I can tell you is that when you are a teacher, you don't pick winners and losers. You meet children where they are. So this idea of eliminating the Department of Education, of taking away the funding for our students with disabilities, what happens to those kids? Children in this country are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, a high quality public education. And that is not determined by if you have a family that can go after grants or school choice or private school funding. This is for everybody. So the proposals in this plan are absolutely egregious. And it's not just the things that are just flashing red lights, the things that we see, but if you read down into the text of this program, things like librarians need to be held accountable. There are children who depend on our public school libraries to get a full and rich literary experience. They should be able to have access to all kinds of books from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of experiences. There's language in Project 2025 that would roll back protections against gender identity and sexual orientation, discrimination on the basis of those things. As a teacher, our LGBTQ youth are our students as well. There's language in Project 2025 to roll back federal feeding programs. Hungry kids do not learn. I was not surprised this week when I heard the comment by J.D. Vance that said, hunger is a motivator for employment. That's what they believe. I believe that it's very basic, that kids should be fed, they should show up ready to learn, and they should be met by teachers who reflect their diversity, their background, their experiences, to welcome and engage them in the learning process. Trump and Vance this whole agenda has spent the entirety of the last few years trying to roll back the student loan forgivenesses that were put in place by the Biden-Harris administration. I can tell you, there are many children that were in my class, not even just my students, but myself included, who are first generation college educated, who would never have had an opportunity for any type of advancement of higher learning, of education, without programs like this, without attempting to address the high cost of college education. And I can tell you that my kids, those kids deserve the same shot, the same opportunity as everyone else. And what this Project 2025 agenda does is strips away the rights of those students. It says that if your family can't afford for you to go to college, then you don't deserve to go. I can tell you that there were so many students that I taught in my 15 years in the classroom who were brilliant, who will be the people that will discover the cure for cancer, who will lead our largest organizations, who will run small businesses, and they deserve a shot too. And they should show up at schools with teachers and facilities that are reflective of that are welcoming of an educational environment. Under the American Rescue Plan, we were able to inject $130 billion into education, into public education. And in many areas, that just backfilled years of disinvestment, just put schools back at zero because they had been underinvested for so long. Their facilities were so outdated. We have to build upon that momentum. We have to make education a priority in this country to make sure that the next generation of leaders are well prepared for what lies ahead. And what this Project 2025 does is strip away all of those rights, all of those opportunities, and shifts resources to the wealthy and well-connected, to the people who already have every opportunity at their disposal, and takes it from the kids and the families who have one shot at getting it right. I can tell you, I represent a district that has some of the best schools in the world. some exclusive boarding schools that are in Connecticut's 5th congressional district. But I also represent a district that has small community schools. I want those community schools across the street from where kids live, where families that are part of the larger communities, that engage with parents, that help teach parents how to advocate for those students. I want the education in those schools to be a high quality education as well, because those kids deserve it. So again, I welcome the opportunity to speak on this topic. It is way too important because, like me, so many of my students are depending on us, are depending on Congress, are depending on our leaders to make sure that we not only open those doors of opportunities, but hold them open. So I now turn it over to the chairwoman of the Iowa Democratic Party, Chair Rita Hart, who's also on this call to talk about Project 2025 and education.
Well, thank you, Congressman Hayes. It's really important that we are here talking about this, and I'm talking to you from Iowa, where we've had some things happen here in education that are part of the agenda of Project 2025. And as a teacher myself in small rural schools for over 20 years, this is really near and dear to my heart as well. I know that parents know all too well that when you're focused on fixing school lunches, you're juggling carpooling or scratching your head while trying to help your child with pre-algebra, there isn't always time for politics. But as classes resume, parents are also tuning into this election because they understand that it will have major consequences for their family. As we've heard, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance support a radical Project 2025 agenda that would throttle opportunities for working families to get ahead, defunding public schools, giving no hope of relief for students with school debt, attacking hardworking teachers, all in the name of policy that has never proven to actually improve educational performance. If Trump and J.D. Vance reach the White House this time around, everyday families can expect even worse. Trump intends to transform schooling into another one of his divisive scams by privatizing public education and giving tax handouts to the wealthy. Here in Iowa is a prime example of what education systems across America will look like if Trump and Republicans get their way. Governor Kim Reynolds and Trump's MAGA allies enacted legislation here that is siphoning taxpayer money from public schools into private schools, leaving public school students, particularly in our rural areas, with fewer opportunities and instead giving them to a select few. This is a system that Trump actually praised a few weeks ago as a model for what he wants to see in every state across the country. Trump and Vance's Project 2025 agenda would force the average family to pay thousands of dollars extra per year. A Center for American Progress study revealed that the Trump-Vance tickets Project 2025 agenda would raise taxes on low and middle income households by an estimated $5,900 to finance tax giveaways for the wealthy and big corporations. Imagine the kind of choices, the kind of sacrifices a working family has to make to compensate for nearly $6,000 that would no longer be in the bank, all because of Donald Trump. Hardworking families should know that Donald Trump won't hesitate to take money out of their schools, out of their wallets, to put more into the pockets of folks who don't need his help. When we talk about education, what we're really talking about is opportunity. When we talk about a job with union negotiated benefits that give parents sick leave, or about a mom and dad saving nearly $6,000 instead of handing it over to folks who don't need that help, that's about opportunity too. At the Democratic National Convention, we heard Vice President Harris make clear that strengthening and expanding the middle class will be a defining goal of her presidency. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are committed to building an opportunity economy, opportunity created through good, accessible education, an opportunity created through an economic agenda that puts working families first. Public education is a ladder to the middle class. We cannot let Trump, Vance, and Republicans like Governor Reynolds jeopardize it as they pursue their backwards mission to put the wealthy and well-connected above everyone else. As they juggle the everyday joys and demands of having kids, the last thing that parents need is a president who is attacking their kids' public school or taking money out of their hard-earned savings to prop up his billionaire donors. It's simple. If we want to make education accessible, create jobs that give our children a future, and build an economy that works for everyone, we cannot let Donald Trump and J.D. Vance near the Oval Office. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz have committed their careers to supporting working families. They share our values and will make sure that our children have the opportunity to get ahead, from fully funding public education to putting more money in parents' wallets to fuel opportunities for the entire family. That's why I and parents across this country will ensure that Trump and Vance's Project 2025 never sees 2025 as we send Team Harris-Walz to the White House this November. Thank you, and I will turn it now back to Alex for questions.
Thank you, Chair Hart, and thank you to all of our panelists who joined us here today for this call to talk about this issue. If we have any questions from folks, we'd ask that you use the Q&A function to drop your questions in there, and then we can read them out for our panel. So I will give folks a minute if they do have ones to just drop them in there so that we can have those ready to go. Okay, we have our first question. This is from Kaylin at Chalkbeat. This is a question for Chair Hart. Can you say a little bit more about the ways you've seen Iowa's private school choice programs leaving rural students behind? What's problematic about this as a national model to you? Oh,
Sorry.
Chair.
So this is a work in progress as this voucher plan is phasing in, and so we're seeing what is obvious, that the tuition money that has been given to private schools has only caused those private schools to raise their tuition even more. This voucher plan was put into place to supposedly create more school choice. That, I think, is a false tenet. There's always been school choice here in Iowa. We have had always had a good private school system and a good private public partnership in the funding of those schools. The difference now is that the funding is being shifted so that more money is going to the private schools to the detriment of the public schools. And that particularly affects rural schools because they don't have the choices of a private school in their area. And so the funding is shifting, but the students are going to be remaining in this public school system. That is the choice that the vast majority of students have, is to be educated close to where they live. And so that's what we're seeing, is that in the areas where there is larger populations, less rural environment, then the money is going to these private schools to the detriment of the public schools, particularly to our rural schools.
Great. And the next question we have for our panel from Catherine. Carly, can we hear more?
Alex, can I just follow up just a little bit on
Please,
what
Congressman.
you said? Because I can tell you most of these programs that they once again can pick and choose the students that they take. So what ends up happening is the students who don't have their own transportation, or the students who might have a disability or need accommodations, or the students who might have a behavior issue, who still deserve to be educated, are left out. So when you're skimming all of the money off the top for public education and shifting it, as Rita said, what is left behind is, in most cases, our most vulnerable students with limited funding and limited resources in order to educate them. Again, it picks winners and losers. We are required to educate everyone. Our public school systems and our schools should be open to educating everyone. And what Project 2025 does and these programs is, again, pick winners and losers, skim off the top and leave students behind. And if students are not successful in their schools, they send them back into the public school system and the funding does not follow them. So those public school systems are then stretched even farther because they still have a responsibility and an obligation to educate those children.
Can I also jump in? Because I think what Chair Hart was saying is that Iowa is an example of what actually happens, as opposed to the rhetoric about what happens, which is that this defunding, this is what Project 2025 is it's two things. It's a defunding mechanism of public schools. And ultimately, as Representative Hayes just said, people who are rich, they can get whatever education they want for their kids. And I don't begrudge them that. But what public education is about is it's a promise to Americans and to America that we are going to do everything we can to help our kids soar. And, Johanna, who was a teacher in Connecticut, I, who was a teacher in New York City, we needed these Title I funds because they helped us actually deal with and be in addition to the tax levy funds that people have had for years. But what essentially has happened is we were able to help poor kids more by leveling the playing field. By taking this money away when we have all sorts of new things to do, including AI, technology, and all sorts of other things, it essentially is saying to middle class and poor kids, you don't matter. And that's what they're doing in terms of Project 2025. And then conversely, you have President Biden and now Vice President Harris and Governor Walz basically saying, no, all kids matter. And that's why we're trying to fund education, not take away the prerogatives of states, but make sure we fund education in a way that helps all kids.
Thank you so much. Those points are exactly on target. That is exactly what's happening here in Iowa. And it comes down to the fact that this is giving schools more choice in who they accept and who they do not. And there is no transparency. The private schools are not required to have the same level of transparency that public schools do. And public schools do not have the luxury of choosing their students. And that's to Congresswoman Hayes's point that we as public school educators take students where they are, and we're happy to bring them up to the next level. And this system allows some school districts to have the funding, but not have the transparency and the requirements that public schools have.
Excellent. Perfect. And then the next question we have is from Michael Jones. This is a question for Congresswoman Hayes, which is, you mentioned investments of the American Rescue Plan brought many schools back to zero. Can you speak to how some of your Republican colleagues are working to slash funding for public education and upcoming funding bills outside of Project 2025 as well?
Absolutely. I was very excited to see that in the American Rescue Plan, there was separate funding for education, because that needed to be addressed separately. As municipalities were trying to figure out how they would extend resources, education came out of a separate bucket. We were able to address HVAC and a lot of facilities where people were talking. I mean, I worked in a building where half of the building didn't have air conditioning, and there were places where you couldn't open a window. So those are things that were long overdue. Things like improving technology and broadband. We were talking about students having one-to-one devices. There are many districts, my district, where not every student had a laptop or a computer or even access to broadband in some of our more rural areas. Wraparound and support services were addressed through the American Rescue Plan, things like before and after school programs, making sure that we had funding for school nurses and social workers and school psychologists, all of those supports that children need in order to be able to learn. And I think one of the things we haven't really talked about is just the need for more Head Start slots. Making sure, I was a high school teacher, but even at high school, you can tell the students who had those early fundamental years of education, their language skills, their development skills, their social and emotional skills were so much more improved. And what I saw in that funding and what I was so proud of is that for that underinvestment and that disinvestment for years, we were beginning to fill in those gaps. But you can't fill in the gap and then create a new gap. And what Project 2025 attempts to do by slashing Title I funding is really just cut every single thing that I just said, every single program that I just said. There's this false assumption that all kids have to do is show up at a building and have a teacher and they're ready to learn. That's not how it works. Teachers need to be well prepared, supported. They need to have the proper training and professional development to meet the various students that come before them. The building needs to be have the facilities upgrades, have clean air and water. Children need to be fed. They need to have those wraparound services where if they need more assistance, they can be pulled out of the classroom. They can have before and after school supports. By slashing Title I funding, you are literally cutting education by 2/3 in the community where I live, the kids where I teach, where I used to teach, the teachers who literally choose to teach in these types of districts because they believe so fundamentally in the children and the families that live here. That's what this does. Project 2025 is a direct assault on those types of programs in those types of communities. And the thing is, it's not like if that funding from Title I schools is cut, that these children and families will have the option to search elsewhere. For many of them, they've got one shot at it. The school across the street is their only opportunity to get a good education. Getting those supports and those tutorial programs at school are their only opportunity to, pass the SATs and get accepted into a program or a job training program. Having someone at school to help guide them through because their family doesn't have the resources or the information to answer the questions that they have about what happens next. The only opportunity and the only place for many of those students is at school. So cutting these programs, I've said many times before, for me, the only place where we talked about school was at school. The only place that I had questions answered about school were at school. Not because my family didn't care about education, but because I was being raised by my grandmother who had a different level of comprehension, understanding, and really didn't know how to navigate the system. So I relied on my teachers and the people in the school building to help me, through the educational process. Stripping Title I funding by 2/3 literally really snatches educational opportunities out of the hands of so many young people. And again, children who come from our most vulnerable communities.
Excellent. And then the final question that we have for our panel from Rebecca at Politico is what education-related priorities would you like to see a Harris administration prioritize?
How much time do you have? I think that, so I'll just be quick. One of the things, so many of the things that, childcare is access to expanding Head Start slots. Early childhood education is big. If we catch kids and engage families much younger, we can reduce absenteeism, reduce dropout rates, keep parents engaged. And that's something that we have the ability to do. One of the things that we really don't talk a lot about when we talk about education, but that is, again, so deeply personal for me, is school nutrition programs, feeding programs. Hunger is a policy choice. We have the ability to feed children in this country, and it is something that we can improve overall health and well-being. We can keep them connected to their schools and communities. We can improve outcomes if our kids are fed and have, again, the supports, the trauma-informed care, all of those things that happen in our school building. And then access to a rich curriculum with the most highly trained professionals in front of them. Kids need to see themselves reflected in their literature, in their resources, in their teachers, in their faculty, in their staff. They need to feel like they are a part of the educational process and not an afterthought. So really giving kids all of the information and then teaching them how to think critically, not telling them what to think or what values to bring, but literally giving kids the opportunity to have healthy dialogue and discussion with professionals who know how to manage those questions and draw out, inquisitive thoughts from kids, and really make sure that that is available for every child in every classroom, no matter where they are. And I can tell you, as a history teacher, Tim Waltz had me at hello, because I know the head and the heart that he brings to this space. We see it through the policies that were passed in Minnesota. He is feeding children. He is welcoming diversity and equity and opportunities for everyone. He is promoting job training programs for the kids who don't see college as a next step. He gets it, because teachers generally do.
So the most important thing that we can do for our kids is to engage them and have them be prepared for life, for college, for career, for civic engagement. That's the promise of public education. That is the promise of America. That's the freedom and opportunity that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are talking about. And so we can, as Representative Hayes said, we can actually, there's a whole lot of things in policy, federal policy, that can be advanced by the vice president, by the governor, when they become president and vice president. But I would actually just look at three things right now, which is, how do we make sure that kids kids get the schools that they need? That schools are what parents, that every public school is a place that parents want to send their kids, teachers want to be, and kids thrive. Let's make sure that high schools have the kind of choices for kids so that they can go into the career of their choice, whether or not they go to college, or they can go to college like we're doing right now because of the CHIPS Act in Syracuse, New York, with Micron. That was spurred on because of the CHIPS Act to create those kind of pathways, like we're doing in lots of schools, Johanna, in Connecticut. But let's make this the norm for all kids, so that the tinkering that they have can become the critical thinking of today and tomorrow. Let's make sure we wrap services around schools so that this question of poverty or this question of hunger is not a question anymore. Instead of banning books, let's banish hunger, like Governor Walz has done in Minnesota. Let's make sure that kids are stoked with literacy. So again, instead of banning books, let's make sure there's plenty of books out there for kids, like the AFT has tried to do by giving out 10 million books over the last 10 years. Let's make sure there's joy in our classrooms and joy in our hearts. And kids want to say, I want to go to school. This is the first week of school. We want kids to be joyful and happy and to actually seize their dreams, not just dream them. And there's lots of things that policy can do to help this, but we need a president and a vice president, just like President Biden and Vice President Harris. We need a president and a vice president who think our kids matter. And that's the difference between them and what they're trying to do and what Project 2025 is and who Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are.
So this is why I have great hope for a Harris-Walz presidency, because I believe that they are going to listen to women like you just heard from, right? From educators, from people who understand this business. And that's what's been missing. When I look at what the Project 2025 is talking about, it's talking about how to take away rather than to build for the future. And so when we have an actual teacher who is in the White House who gets this stuff, he will also understand that he's got to listen to teachers in order to make the kinds of improvements and to work for the future. My frustration in as a state senator and as a resident of Iowa right now has been the negative nature of the leadership here under the Republican Party and Governor Kim Reynolds' leadership. We started school a few years ago with I guess what I would say is that we started a legislative session a couple years ago with the Republican leadership making a speech and talking about teachers' sinister agenda. And immediately that caused every teacher to be back on their heels, knowing that they were being attacked, that they were not being valued, that they weren't being heard on what they know is good for kids, that instead they had to be defensive. That is so disheartening, and it really is indicative of the damage that can be done with that kind of attitude and that kind of leadership. So I'm very hopeful that with the leadership of Harris and Walz, that they will listen to teachers like Congresswoman Hayes and like President Weingarten, and they will understand this at a much better level so that we can actually talk about what we're going to do in education going forward that really is going to make a difference and have our students be prepared for the future that they really need to be prepared for. And we know that the teachers that already exist in the pipeline can make happen and make this world a better place for so many people as a result of the fact that we have a good educational system that provides them that opportunity.
Alex, before we log off, can I just add one more thing that I think that this Harris-Walz administration would address when we talk about education policy? It's something that I didn't learn about when I went through teacher preparation. It's something that I didn't learn about as a student teacher, but it's something that I was aware of and cognizant of every day in the classroom, and that is keeping our children free from gun violence. The idea that it is rampant, that it is a uniquely American problem, that our children deal with this on multiple occasions throughout their academic journey is unconscionable. And it is something that we have to provide solutions to. And I know with fidelity that a Kamala Harris president and a Tim Walz vice president would prioritize the safety of our students, would understand the trauma that they have to deal with, would understand what teachers and administrators and faculty and staff are dealing with inside of school buildings when it comes to this uniquely American problem of gun violence in our schools. I know that we will begin to come up with real and meaningful solutions to that problem.
Excellent and critically important words. Well, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists and attendees for joining us this morning. If folks do have any other follow-up questions, I know in the chat there were questions as well about the DNC's digital ad buy that came out this morning. You can absolutely redirect them to the email that's sent out, the advisory on this, which I believe is dncpress@dnc.org. And we will pass along any details we can and get answers for any other questions we can on our end. But otherwise, thank you again to our panelists for joining us this morning and sharing this critically important message about Project 2025 and how it would hurt education in this country. And thank you to all of our attendees as well.